Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Copper Canyon, Arizona. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1906, and Copper Canyon was like many other mining settlements that dotted the Arizona Territory, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of red rock formations that seemed to glow like dying embers at sunset. What distinguished this town, however, was the Copper Queen Saloon and the three women who ran it, Eliza, Margaret, and Catherine Blackwood. They were known throughout the region simply as the Saloon Sisters. In the summer of that year, when temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees and the air hung heavy with dust, something began to change in Copper Canyon. The town records from this period, now stored in the Yavapai County Historical Society archives, show a disturbing pattern that went largely unnoticed until historian Dr. Franklin Mercer began examining them in 1962. The records show that between June and December of 1906, 17 residents of Copper Canyon reported symptoms of what was then described as nervous exhaustion or melancholia. By the end of that year, the town's population had decreased from approximately 200 to fewer than 120 individuals. Official explanations cited abandonment of the local copper mine or relocation due to harsh conditions, but Dr. Mercer's examination of documents long forgotten in county archives suggested something far more sinister. The Blackwood sisters arrived in Copper Canyon in March of 1906, purchasing the failing saloon from its previous owner, a Mr. James Sullivan, who left town shortly after the transaction. According to deed transfers recorded at the county clerk's office, the sisters paid nearly twice the property's assessed value, an unusual transaction that raised few eyebrows at the time but would later become significant. What few knew was that Sullivan had been desperately trying to sell the establishment for nearly 2 years. His private correspondence, discovered decades later in a trunk in his nephew's attic in Tucson, revealed a man increasingly disturbed by his business. In a letter dated January 1906, Sullivan wrote to his brother, "Something isn't right with this place. The walls seem to listen. Last week I found another dead animal beneath the floorboards. No sign of how it got there. I hear scratching from the cellar at night when I'm alone. I must sell before spring, or I fear I shall lose my mind entirely." The most revealing document from Sullivan's correspondence was found tucked inside a family Bible, a letter never sent, dated just 3 days before the sisters arrived. "They're coming. I don't know how they found me, but they have. 3 women making inquiries in Prescott, asking specific questions about my establishment. The description matches them exactly. How they've tracked me across 2 states I cannot comprehend, but I recognize the pattern now. It began the same way in Silver City, 3 sisters, refined and educated, seeking to purchase property with a root cellar. I left everything behind when I realized what had happened to the others. I cannot flee again. I've nowhere left to go. Perhaps the stories are merely coincidence or superstition. Perhaps I've allowed frontier isolation to overwhelm my reason. If you don't hear from me again, know that I tried to warn others. No one would listen." Sullivan's subsequent whereabouts remained a mystery for decades until Dr. Mercer uncovered a patient registry from a sanitarium in California. A James Sullivan was admitted in April 1906, described as suffering from acute paranoid delusions and profound emotional detachment. The attending physician noted, "Patient exhibits unusual physical symptoms, extreme pallor, lowered body temperature, and a peculiar mark resembling a burn behind his right ear. He rarely speaks, but when he does, it is only to repeat the phrase, 'They take what cannot be returned.'" Sullivan remained institutionalized until his death in 1937, never having regained what his records called normal emotional capacity. The sisters' arrival was noted by several residents in their diaries and correspondence. Tobias Fleming, the town banker, wrote to a colleague in Prescott, "The most curious trio arrived on yesterday's stage. 3 women, clearly sisters, dressed in the finest Eastern fashion despite the dusty journey. They inquired immediately about Sullivan's place and seemed delighted to hear it was for sale. What's strangest is how they knew. The sale hasn't been advertised outside the county, Fleming's letter continued. I assisted them with the financial transaction today. Most unusual, they paid entirely in gold coin, fresh minted double eagles with none of the wear one would expect from circulation. When I commented on this, the eldest, Eliza, she calls herself, smiled and said, "We prefer our assets tangible, Mr. Fleming. One never knows when paper might lose its value." Something in her tone sent a chill through me, though I cannot say why. Even more curious, when they signed the documents, I noticed they all used their left hands, yet none of the flourishes or awkwardness one typically observes in left-handed writers. The precision was unnatural somehow. The Copper Queen Saloon stood at the north end of Main Street, a 2-story structure with a false front, typical of Western architecture. What made it unusual was the root cellar, expansive for such an establishment and reportedly extending well beyond the building's footprint. County records indicate that within 2 weeks of taking ownership, the sisters applied for permits to make substantial improvements to the property. The contractors hired for these renovations were not local men, but a team brought in from Phoenix. According to payroll records preserved in the territorial archives, these workers were paid triple the standard wage for such work. More tellingly, they completed the job in just 11 days, after which they left Arizona territory entirely. Later investigation by Dr. Mercer found that none of the men ever returned to the region, and attempts to locate them in the 1960s proved fruitless. One tantalizing clue about the renovation came from a supply invoice discovered in county records. The materials list included items typical for saloon improvements, lumber, paint, brass fixtures, but also several unusual entries: 12 polished obsidian panels, 3 ilex 5-ors, copper tubing, 200 feet, acid-resistant, and most puzzling, specialized glass containers, hermetically sealed, 24. The invoice was marked "Paid in full gold" and stamped with a curious symbol that appeared nowhere else in territorial records, a triangle containing what looked like an inverted eye. Michael Byrne, editor of the weekly Copper Canyon Courier, wrote in his April 13, 1906 edition, "The Blackwood sisters have transformed the old Sullivan place almost overnight. New paint, new furnishings, and reportedly the finest selection of spirits this side of Prescott have made the Copper Queen the crown jewel of our humble town." In the same edition, Byrne noted, "Most remarkable is the speed with which these refined ladies have integrated themselves into our community. Already they count among their acquaintances our most distinguished citizens. A private gathering held last weekend saw attendance by Mayor Hollister, Sheriff Wade, Dr. Phillips, and other notable gentlemen. This reporter regrets his invitation was apparently lost in delivery." The newspaper further reported that the sisters had installed modern gas lights, unusual for such a remote location, giving the saloon's interior a warm, inviting glow visible through the windows even from the outskirts of town. This detail would later feature prominently in Dr. Mercer's investigation. Another curious addition, mentioned only briefly in Byrne's reporting but highlighted in Dr. Mercer's notes, was a collection of ornate mirrors imported from Europe. According to the shipping manifest recovered from territorial customs records, these mirrors, 12 in total, were declared as antique decorative items, with an unusually high declared value. Dr. Kikana. Mercer's notes speculate that the mirrors' positioning throughout the saloon, particularly in the private rooms, seemed calculated rather than decorative, as though intended to create specific visual angles or reflections. An unpublished draft found among Byrne's papers after his disappearance included a paragraph that never appeared in the newspaper. I confess a journalist's curiosity about the extensive work undertaken in the root cellar. When I inquired about it, Miss Catherine smiled in that disarming way of hers and said, "We have special storage needs, Mr. Byrne." Perhaps we'll show you sometime if you continue to take such an interest in our establishment." Something in her tone made me regret my question immediately. I found myself apologizing without knowing exactly what for. The sisters themselves were a curiosity. Eliza, the eldest at approximately 35, handled the business affairs. Margaret, perhaps 30, managed the bar and entertained patrons with piano performances. Catherine, the youngest at about 25, was described in multiple accounts as possessing striking beauty and an uncanny ability to remember every detail about a person after just one meeting. None of the sisters were married, unusual for women of that era, especially in a frontier town where men outnumbered women significantly. According to Dr. Mercer's research, they claimed to be from Boston, though no records confirming this origin were ever located. They dressed in the latest Eastern fashions, spoke with refined accents, and carried themselves with an air of sophistication that seemed out of place in the dusty mining town. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, wife of the town's preacher, noted in her personal diary, "The Blackwood women attended service today for the first time. They sat together in the back row, perfectly still throughout. They sang hymns without needing to look at the words. When I greeted them afterward, the eldest, Eliza, clasped my hand and commented on how lovely my brooch was, asking if it had been my mother's. I never mentioned my mother to her, nor that the brooch was indeed her gift to me before she passed. I felt a chill despite the warm day." Within weeks of their arrival, the sisters had established a routine. The Copper Queen opened daily at noon, offering meals and drinks to the miners and businessmen of Copper Canyon. Eliza managed the accounts from a small office near the entrance. Margaret played piano in the evenings, her repertoire ranging from popular tunes to complex classical pieces that seemed beyond what one would expect in a frontier saloon. Catherine circulated among the patrons, engaging in conversation, taking orders, and occasionally inviting select individuals to private gatherings, held after regular hours. These gatherings quickly became the most exclusive events in Copper Canyon. Invitations, delivered personally by Catherine, were printed on heavy cardstock scented with a distinctive perfume that lingered on the fingers. Recipients reported feeling both honored and somehow compelled to attend, despite the unusual hour, typically midnight, at which these events began. One such invitation, preserved in the County Historical Society's collection, reads, "The Blackwood sisters request the pleasure of your company for a private social gathering on the evening of April 21st, commencing at midnight. Refreshments of a unique nature will be served. Your presence has been specially requested. We've taken a particular interest in you." The paper, an unusual bluish hue, bears a watermark of the same triangular symbol found on the renovation invoice. Mayor Hollister, in a letter to his brother in San Francisco, dated April 1906, wrote, "The newest establishment in town has become quite the center of society here. The proprietresses, 3 unmarried sisters of considerable refinement, have taken to hosting exclusive gatherings after hours. I've attended twice now, though I find I can recall little of what transpires. The finest brandies and liqueurs are served, along with a peculiar tea the sisters import privately. The conversations are stimulating, though strangely difficult to remember in detail the following day. What I do recall is a sense of having shared thoughts and feelings I would normally keep private. Catherine, the youngest sister, has a way of drawing one out that is both unsettling and oddly liberating. The first unusual incident occurred in late May 1906. Thomas Willard, a 42-year-old mine supervisor with no history of mental instability, was found wandering barefoot in the desert 3 miles outside of town. According to the report filed by Sheriff Marcus Wade, Willard was severely dehydrated, disoriented, and repeatedly muttering about the sisters' tea. When returned to town and examined by Dr. Harold Phillips, the local physician, Willard could not recall how he had ended up in the desert or what had happened during the previous 48 hours. Dr. Phillips's notes, preserved in the county archives, state, Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with consumption of a powerful sedative or hallucinogenic substance, pupils dilated, speech slurred, severe disorientation. Claims to have been invited to a private gathering at the Copper Queen, but remembers nothing after being served tea by Miss Catherine. Further in his medical journal, which was not part of the official record, but was discovered among his personal effects decades later, Phillips wrote, "Willard's condition is most peculiar. Beyond the obvious signs of exposure and dehydration, he exhibits physical symptoms I cannot readily explain. His pulse is abnormally slow, his skin uncommonly pale despite days in the sun, and most disturbing, there appears to be a small, perfectly circular mark behind his left ear, resembling a burn but without accompanying inflammation. When I inquired about it, he became agitated and refused to let me examine it further." The doctor's private notes continue. "When I asked what he remembered of the gathering, Willard became increasingly distressed. 'They had mirrors,' he said, 'arranged in a circle in the cellar. They made us sit in the center, one by one, while they... At this point he broke off, trembling uncontrollably. 'They're not what they appear to be,' he whispered. 'In the mirrors you can see them as they truly are, but by then it's too late. They've already begun to feed.' I pressed him on what he meant by this, but he shook his head violently and would say no more. Willard recovered physically within days, but reportedly remained changed. According to his wife's testimony, recorded months later, he became withdrawn, suffered from nightmares, and refused to discuss what had happened. He resigned his position at the mine in June, and the family left Copper Canyon by the end of the month. In a deposition given to county officials investigating the town's population decline in early 1907, Mrs. Willard stated, "My husband was never the same after that night. He would wake screaming about mirrors and emptiness. He became obsessed with checking his reflection, sometimes staring at himself for hours in our small looking glass, touching his face as if to make sure it was still there. When I suggested returning to the saloon to confront the sisters about what had happened, he became hysterical, saying they would take the rest if he ever went near them again. I don't know what he meant, but I know we had to leave that place." The Willards relocated to California, where Thomas found work with another mining operation. 6 months later, according to newspaper reports, he disappeared during a routine inspection of a new tunnel. His lantern and tools were found at the tunnel entrance, but no trace of Thomas himself was ever discovered despite an extensive search. Mrs. Willard reported that in the days before his disappearance, her husband had become increasingly agitated, claiming that he had seen the youngest sister watching from reflections in windows, and that they had found him again. This might have remained an isolated incident, except that similar cases began to appear with increasing frequency. Between June and August, 5 more individuals, all men between the ages of 30 and 50, all relatively prosperous members of the community, experienced episodes of disorientation, memory loss, and what Dr. Phillips described as acute nervous disturbances. Each had reportedly spent time at the Copper Queen in the days before their symptoms appeared. Each had been invited to what the sisters called their special gatherings, private events held after regular hours, by invitation only. And each, upon recovery, either refused to discuss what had happened or claimed to have no memory of the events. Within weeks of their experiences, all left Copper Canyon. Dr. Phillips began keeping a private record of these cases, noting similarities in symptoms and circumstances. His journal entries became increasingly concerned. "I have now treated 6 patients with nearly identical presentations. All had attended private functions at the Copper Queen. All exhibited the same circular mark, though in different locations, behind the ear, on the inner wrist, at the nape of the neck. All showed signs of extreme fatigue and anemia, not consistent with their outward physical condition. Blood samples reveal abnormalities I cannot explain with current medical knowledge. Most disturbing is the psychological effect. Each man seems diminished somehow, as though some essential quality has been extracted. They avoid mirrors and become agitated when I pursue certain lines of questioning. The doctor's concerns were dismissed by town officials, most of whom were themselves regular patrons of the Copper Queen. Sheriff Wade, when presented with Phillips's observations, reportedly told him, "You're seeing patterns where there are only coincidences, Harold. The sisters run the finest establishment this town has ever seen. They're bringing culture and refinement to Copper Canyon. Perhaps you should attend one of their gatherings yourself. It might broaden your perspective." According to Phillips's journal, Wade's demeanor during this conversation was unnaturally calm, his eyes never quite focusing on mine. I noted a similar mark behind his right ear, partially concealed by his hair. When I mentioned it, he touched it absently and changed the subject. Phillips's notes from late June detail an unsettling encounter with Eliza Blackwood. Miss Blackwood visited my office today, ostensibly to discuss the health of her sister Margaret, who she claimed was suffering from headaches. Throughout our conversation, she displayed an uncommon knowledge of medical matters, using terminology one wouldn't expect from a layperson. When I inquired about her background, she smiled and said, "We've had occasion to study human anatomy quite thoroughly, Doctor. The body's capacity for regeneration is remarkable, don't you think? Though some things, once taken, cannot be restored." Before leaving, she extended an invitation to join them for a private gathering, saying they had taken a special interest in my work. Something in her gaze made it difficult to refuse directly. I found myself promising to consider it, though everything in me screams against the idea. Most disturbing was her parting comment. "We've noticed your interest in our little soirees, Doctor. Your patients tell us you've been asking questions. We admire curiosity. It suggests a mind with exceptional qualities." The threat beneath her polite words was unmistakable. The most detailed account of what occurred during these special gatherings comes from the journal of Edward Paxton, a 38-year-old assayer who worked for the mining company. His journal, discovered among his possessions after his death in 1929 and now held by his granddaughter in Flagstaff, contains several entries from July 1906 describing his experiences. July 12th, I am honored to have received an invitation to the sisters' private gathering tomorrow night. Catherine delivered it personally, saying they had taken a special interest in my work and wished to discuss a business opportunity. It is well known that these events are exclusive affairs, with only the town's most distinguished citizens receiving invitations. July 14th. I can scarcely believe what occurred last night, and dare not commit the details to paper. The sisters are not what they appear to be. The things I witnessed in that root cellar, the others who were there, men I have known and respected participating willingly in such— no, I cannot write it. I feel a heaviness in my mind as though parts of the evening are shrouded in mist. Did they put something in the tea? The strange-smelling smoke from those brass burners? I feel marked somehow, changed. July 15th. Slept poorly, dreams filled with mirrors and faces that were not quite right. Woke to find a small, circular burn on my inner wrist that I don't recall receiving. It doesn't hurt, but feels cold to the touch. Went to Dr. Phillips, who seemed unsurprised to see it. He asked detailed questions about the gathering, but I found I could not answer many of them. There are gaps in my memory, whole hours missing. He gave me a tonic for sleep, but seemed reluctant to let me leave his office. July 16th. They know I remember more than the others. Catherine visited today, her smile never reaching her eyes. She suggested I join them again tomorrow night. When I declined, she placed her hand on mine and said, "We insist, Edward. We've taken a special interest in you." Her touch was cold, despite the summer heat, I am afraid. July 17th. Must leave town. Not safe. They are not what they seem. The mirrors in the cellar show the truth. God help anyone who drinks their damn tea. The journal entries end here. County records indicate that Edward Paxton sold his property at a significant loss on July 18th and departed Copper Canyon the same day. He never returned. What makes Paxton's account particularly valuable to researchers is a loose page found tucked between the journal's cover and first page. Written in a shakier hand than the formal entries, it contains fragmentary descriptions: root cellar, larger than possible, tunnels, mirrors arranged in a circle. The tea tastes of licorice and something metallic. After drinking, everything becomes distant except the sisters' voices. They ask questions, personal questions that I answer without wanting to. The mirrors begin to change, or perhaps it's the reflection that changes. I saw myself, but also not myself. There were spaces, gaps where something should have been. Eliza said it was happening well, that I was exceptionally compatible. Margaret played music that seemed to come from inside my head rather than her piano. Catherine touched the mirrors, and they rippled like water. The other men sat in chairs arranged in a circle, eyes vacant, smiling slightly as the sisters moved from one to the next, whispering, touching, extracting something invisible but vital. They are collectors of some kind, but what they take isn't physical. A final scrawled note at the bottom of the page reads, "They're not human. In the mirrors, they're true forms, elongated limbs, too many joints, faces that shift and flow, eyes like empty wells. And behind them, shadows of others watching through the glass from somewhere else. A hunger that spans worlds." Paxton's subsequent fate remained unknown until Dr. Mercer uncovered a death certificate from a small town in Colorado, dated September 1907. The cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging, with a note from the examining physician stating, "Subject exhibited signs of severe malnutrition and anemia despite adequate means for sustenance." A peculiar circular mark was observed on the right wrist. Local residents report the deceased was reclusive and paranoid, claiming he was being hunted by collectors who could see through reflective surfaces. By September 1906, a pattern had emerged that was impossible to ignore. Sheriff Wade, as according to his official correspondence with territorial officials in Phoenix, had begun an investigation into the activities at the Copper Queen. His letter, dated September 23rd, states, "While no laws appear to have been broken, the coincidence of these medical episodes and subsequent departures from town, all connected to individuals who frequented the Blackwood Sisters' establishment, warrants further inquiry." Wade's investigation, however, yielded no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Every person interviewed spoke highly of the sisters. The Copper Queen was described as a civilizing influence on the rough mining town. The sisters themselves cooperated fully, allowing Wade to inspect the public areas of the saloon, though they denied him access to their private quarters and the root cellar, citing proprietary concerns about their special imported spirits stored there. What Wade's official report doesn't mention, but Dr. Mercer discovered in the sheriff's private correspondence with the territorial marshal, is that Wade himself had begun experiencing unusual symptoms shortly after initiating his investigation. In a personal telegram sent September 30th, Wade requested a leave of absence, citing health concerns. The request was denied due to the lack of available replacement personnel. A personal letter from Wade to his brother, dated October 3rd, and never mailed, found among Wade's effects after his death, reveals a man increasingly disturbed. "I fear I've made a grave error in judgment. The investigation was a mistake. The sisters know what I've been doing, though I've told no one of my suspicions. Yesterday Eliza called me by my childhood nickname, one I've never shared with anyone in this territory. She mentioned details about our family farm in Ohio that she couldn't possibly know. When I asked how she'd learned these things, she smiled and said, 'You told us everything, Marcus, don't you remember, during your last visit?' But I have no memory of discussing such matters with her or anyone else here. There are gaps in my recollection, Thomas, entire evenings missing from my mind. And I've found a mark, like a small burn, behind my ear. Doctor, Phillips has noticed it too, though I've tried to keep it hidden. He says others have similar marks. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know I don't feel complete." The sheriff's own deputy, James Cooper, was quoted as saying, The sisters have brought culture and refinement to our town. These rumors are nothing but jealousy from competing establishments or the wives of men who spend too much time enjoying the sisters' hospitality. Dr. Phillips, however, continued his private investigation. His journal entries from this period show increasing concern. Cooper bears the mark as well, behind his left ear, just like Wade's. I've now observed similar marks on 8 men in positions of authority in town: the mayor, the banker, both deputies, the newspaper editor, and others. All frequent the Copper Queen. All have changed subtly in recent months, less expressive, more compliant, especially regarding matters relating to the Blackwood sisters. They seem to function normally otherwise, though their families report personality changes, less affection, fewer opinions, a certain emotional flatness. Phillips's observations became more clinical and detailed as his concerns grew. I've begun examining the physical symptoms more systematically. All affected individuals show similar changes in blood composition, decreased red cell count, altered plasma viscosity, and, most puzzling, traces of an unidentifiable crystalline substance in the serum. Their core body temperature runs approximately 1 degree below normal. Pupillary response is delayed. Most telling is their reaction to their own reflections, a momentary confusion, as though they don't quite recognize themselves, followed by a touching of the face or straightening of clothing, as if to confirm their physical presence. In early October, Phillips attempted to contact colleagues in neighboring towns, sending letters describing his observations and requesting assistance. None of these letters appear to have reached their destinations. The doctor noted in his journal, "My correspondent seems not to be leaving town. When I inquired at the post office, Mr. Simmons assured me my letters had been sent, but his eyes slid away from mine when he spoke. I observed a familiar circular mark on his right wrist, partially concealed by his cuff." Around this time, the sisters' behavior changed in a way that several residents found noteworthy. Eliza was seen making frequent trips to the telegraph office. Margaret began performing different music at the saloon, complex, discordant pieces that patrons described as strangely affecting and hypnotic. Catherine, who had previously been selective about whom she invited to private gatherings, began extending invitations more broadly. Mrs. Whitman, the preacher's wife, noted in her diary on October 10th, "The youngest Blackwood sister visited today with an invitation for William to attend what she called a special session for the spiritual leaders of the community. I urged him to decline, as something about these women has always disturbed me. The way they look at people, not as individuals but as items on a shelf. William insisted it would be impolite to refuse, saying many prominent men in town have attended these gatherings. He says I worry too much." Her entry from October 12th reads simply, "William came home very late last night. He doesn't seem himself today. When I asked about the gathering, he said he couldn't recall much, but that it had been enlightening. He has a small burn behind his ear that he cannot explain. He doesn't want me to touch it." The diary's next entry, dated October 15th, shows growing alarm. "William has been spending more and more time at the Copper Queen. He says the sisters value his spiritual insights, but I hardly recognize the man who returns home each night. His sermons have changed, less talk of salvation, and more about the transformative power of surrender and the gift of being truly seen. Yesterday I found him staring into the mirror for over an hour, touching his face, as if to confirm it was his own. When I asked what troubled him, he said, 'I'm still here, Eleanor. Parts of me are still here.' Then he smiled in a way that chilled me to the bone." In October, something changed. The sisters, who had previously been selective about their clientele, began extending invitations to their private gatherings more broadly. Men from all walks of life, miners, shopkeepers, ranchers, were invited to attend. The only common factor appeared to be that these were men without families in the area, often newcomers to Copper Canyon with few established connections. The frequency of these gatherings also increased. What had been weekly events became nightly occurrences. Lights could be seen in the Copper Queen's windows until dawn, and strange music, described by one witness as like a piano being played underwater, could be heard from the street. Dr. Phillips's records show a corresponding increase in cases of what he termed nervous disorders during this period. His October 26th entry reads, "Have now treated 15 patients with similar symptoms: sleep disturbances, confusion, memory loss. Some report vivid nightmares and unexplained physical exhaustion. All deny knowledge of the cause, though all have frequented the Copper Queen. Most disturbing are the marks found on several patients, small, circular burns on the inner wrists or behind the ears. When questioned, patients become agitated and refuse further discussion." By early November, Phillips had compiled substantial documentation of what he believed was evidence of some form of systematic harm being inflicted on the townspeople. He shared his concerns with Sheriff Wade, bringing his medical journal and detailed notes on each case. According to Phillips's account of this meeting, written the same evening, "Wade listened to my concerns with that same unnervingly calm expression I've noted in others who frequent the sisters' establishment. When I showed him the pattern of marks and symptoms, he examined my documentation carefully, then returned it to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 'You've been working too hard, Harold,' he said. 'Perhaps you need a night of relaxation. The sisters have mentioned their interest in having you attend one of their gatherings. They have a professional interest in medical matters, you know.' When I declined, his expression hardened momentarily before returning to that placid mask. 'I'll keep your concerns in mind,' he said, 'but I see nothing here that warrants official action.' As I was leaving, I noticed a small leather-bound book on his desk, identical to the journals I've seen Catherine Blackwood carrying. When I asked about it, he quickly put it in a drawer, saying it was just a gift from a friend. I fear my attempt to alert the authorities has only put me in greater danger." The situation reached a turning point on November 12, 1906. According to the Copper Canyon Courier's report, filed by an assistant editor, Michael Byrne having taken ill the previous week, a fire broke out at the home of Sheriff Marcus Wade. The sheriff, who lived alone, did not survive. The newspaper reported it as a tragic accident, likely caused by a knocked-over kerosene lamp. Dr. Phillips, however, who examined the body, noted discrepancies. In a hastily written entry in his journal that night, Wade's body shows none of the typical signs of smoke inhalation or burns consistent with being caught in a house fire. Instead, there is a larger version of the circular mark we've seen on others, this one centered on his chest, approximately 3 inches in diameter. The tissue around it is desiccated, almost mummified, while the rest of the body is untouched by fire. This was no accident. I've hidden this journal in my medicine cabinet behind the older ledgers. If anything happens to me, may whoever finds this understand what we're facing in Copper Canyon." The official death certificate, signed by Deputy Cooper rather than Phillips, as would have been customary, listed the cause as accidental death due to house fire. Cooper was immediately appointed acting sheriff. His first official action was to declare the investigation into the Copper Queen closed, citing a lack of evidence of any wrongdoing. What happened next was documented in the personal correspondence of Dr. Phillips, in letters sent to a medical colleague in Prescott, but never delivered. These letters were discovered in 1963 among Phillips's effects after his death, November 15, 1906. "I fear for my safety and that of the remaining townspeople. Wade's death was no accident. He confided in me just days before that he had discovered something in the county records concerning the Blackwood sisters, something about their previous location in Nevada. He meant to telegraph authorities there, but never had the chance. Cooper is clearly under their influence. I saw him emerging from their private entrance at dawn yesterday, looking disoriented, the same look I've seen on too many patients lately. The sisters are hosting what they're calling a Thanksgiving celebration next week, inviting nearly every man in town. I've examined the invitations, heavy cardstock perfumed with an unusual scent that makes me lightheaded. I've advised people to decline, but few listen. There's a strange eagerness in their eyes. even among those who previously expressed suspicion. November 16, 1906. I've spent the day reviewing territorial newspapers from the past 5 years, looking for any mention of the Blackwood sisters before they arrived in Copper Canyon. I found a disturbing pattern. 3 towns in Nevada, Silver Peak, Rawhide, and Belmont, each experienced similar scenarios. The arrival of 3 sisters, under different names but matching descriptions, the opening of an upscale establishment, a series of mysterious ailments among prominent citizens, followed by population decline. In each case, the sisters departed shortly before authorities from larger cities arrived to investigate reports of unusual occurrences. In Belmont, the sisters were known as the Chadwick family; in Rawhide, the Dunsmores; in Silver Peak, the Prestons. Same pattern, different names. November 19, 1906. I visited the telegraph office today to send an urgent message to the Territorial Medical Board. While there, I discovered that Eliza Blackwood has been sending regular telegrams to an address in San Francisco. The operator, Jenkins, was reluctant to discuss the matter, but when pressed, admitted that the messages contained unusual phrases and numbers that made little sense. He copied one down, thinking it some kind of code. Collection progressing. Quality exceptional in specimens 7, 13, and 21. Capacity 84% complete. Alignment proceeds as calculated. When I asked who had received these telegrams, Jenkins became agitated and insisted he had already said too much. I noticed he bore the familiar mark behind his left ear. November 21, 1906. It is worse than I feared. Last night, I finally discovered what they've been putting in the tea. While treating Cooper for a minor injury, I found a small glass vial in his coat pocket. The liquid inside matched what I've detected on the breath of affected patients. It's a compound I'm not familiar with, but its effects are clear. Highly addictive, induces both suggestibility and selective amnesia. I confronted Cooper, who became immediately hostile, then suddenly calm in a way that chilled my blood. He smiled and said, "The sisters already know what you've done, Harold. They've been expecting it. They've taken a special interest in you. I'm leaving tonight, but feel compelled to document what I know in case I don't make it far enough." This was the last known communication from Dr. Phillips. According to county records, he sold his practice on November 22nd and supposedly relocated to California, though no records of his arrival or practice there were ever found. On the evening of November 22nd, 2 days before the planned Thanksgiving celebration, another significant event occurred that was only documented in the private journal of Thomas Schmidt, a German immigrant who worked as the town's cobbler. Schmidt, who had deliberately kept a low profile and avoided the Copper Queen entirely, observed unusual activity. Tonight there was a strange procession of wagons to the back entrance of the saloon. Between midnight and dawn, I counted 6 large freight wagons, the kind used for moving household goods. Men I did not recognize unloaded large wooden crates and carried them into the cellar entrance. Cooper and his deputy supervised, keeping people away. Most curious was that one smaller crate fell and broke open. Inside appeared to be a collection of glass containers, each about the size of a preserves jar. I could not see clearly in the darkness, but they seemed to emit a faint glow. The sisters emerged immediately when this happened, Catherine visibly distressed. They hurried to gather the containers, handling them with extreme care. Eliza looked around as though sensing observation, and seemed to stare directly at my window, though I was well hidden behind my curtains. I felt a chill as though someone had walked over my grave. Schmidt's observations continued. The activity at the Copper Queen has increased dramatically. Throughout today I watched as nearly every man remaining in town visited the saloon, each emerging looking dazed but oddly content. Even more disturbing are the changes to the building itself. The windows that were once clear glass now have a strange bluish tint that makes it impossible to see inside. The gas lamps burn with an unnatural color, and most alarming, I've begun to notice that the building's proportions seem wrong somehow. The distance between windows wider than it should be, the height of the doors slightly too tall for human comfort. I wonder if anyone else notices these changes, or if I'm simply succumbing to the same paranoia that drove Sullivan to sell in the first place. The Thanksgiving celebration at the Copper Queen took place on November 24, 1906. No newspaper account exists, as the Copper Canyon Courier had ceased publication after Michael Burns' unexplained disappearance earlier that month. What we know comes primarily from Schmidt's journal. The entire town seemed to sleepwalk toward the Copper Queen at sunset. I watched from my shop window as they went, men I had known for years, their faces eager yet somehow vacant. I had declined my invitation, claiming illness. The truth is that I have suspected something unnatural about the sisters since they arrived. Their perfect skin that never shows the effects of the desert sun. The way they sometimes speak in unison without seeming to realize it. The strange sounds that echo from the root cellar late at night. As darkness fell, I saw lights in the saloon windows, not the usual warm glow, but something pulsing, almost blue in color. Music played, but not Margaret's usual piano tunes. This was something discordant, played on instruments I could not identify. I heard chanting beneath the music. Near midnight, unable to contain my curiosity, I approached the saloon. The windows were fogged, but through one smeared pane I could see inside. The main room had been cleared, the men seated in concentric circles around a central point where the sisters stood. They were no longer dressed in their usual finery, but wore simple white shifts. Their hair, normally styled elaborately, hung loose down their backs, so long it reached the floor. They moved among the men, touching faces, offering a cup to each. As the men drank, their expressions changed, first to confusion, then to something like rapture. Some began to weep, others laughed without sound. The sisters led them, one by one, toward the door to the root cellar. I watched for nearly an hour as the room gradually emptied. When only a handful of men remained upstairs, I saw Catherine pause and turn slowly toward the window where I stood. Though there was no way she could have seen me in the darkness, she smiled directly at me and raised her hand in greeting. I ran back to my shop and have locked myself inside. The celebration continued until dawn. I heard sounds no human throat should make, both ecstatic and agonized. When the sun rose, I watched the men emerge, walking slowly back to their homes or businesses, each looking somehow diminished, as though something essential had been drained away. Schmidt's account continues with observations made the following day. The town feels different this morning, quieter, as though not just the people, but the place itself has been subdued somehow. The men move through their routines with mechanical precision, their expressions blank. When they speak, their voices lack inflection. The preacher passed my shop without greeting me, though we have been friends for years. His eyes were unfocused, and he kept touching the mark behind his ear. Most disturbing is what I observed at midday. The sisters emerged from the Copper Queen for the first time in weeks, walking arm in arm down Main Street. They looked, radiant is the only word for it. Their skin had a luminous quality I've never seen on any living person. As they passed, everyone stopped to watch them, men removing their hats, women curtsying as though in the presence of royalty. The sisters acknowledged no one, but I saw Catherine smile to herself in a way that made my blood run cold. Schmidt's journal entry for November 25th is brief. They came for me today, Cooper and Daniels from the general store. Said the sisters were concerned I had missed their gathering due to illness. They've invited me to a private recovery session this evening. Their eyes were wrong, the pupils too large, the whites webbed with red. I'm leaving now. There's nothing for me here anymore. According to county records, 18 more residents left Copper Canyon in the week following the Thanksgiving celebration. Property sales were recorded, but many homes and businesses were simply abandoned, their owners departing with whatever they could carry. By December 1906, Copper Canyon's population had decreased to fewer than 100 people. Those who remained exhibited what one traveling salesman, in a letter to his company in Phoenix, described as a peculiar listlessness, as though the entire town were recovering from a long illness. The men walk the streets without speaking, their eyes downcast. Many businesses stand empty. The only establishment that seems to thrive is that saloon run by those three sisters. Another visitor, a mining company representative sent to assess the viability of continuing operations, wrote in his report, "The town appears to be dying, though not for the usual reasons that claim mining settlements. The ore body remains viable according to assay reports. Water is plentiful from the nearby creek. Yet half the population has vanished in recent months. Those who remain seem altered somehow, docile to the point of vacancy, moving through their daily routines like automatons. Many avoid eye contact and touch their necks or wrists frequently, as though checking for something. I recommend ceasing operations not due to resource exhaustion, but because I believe there is something unwholesome affecting the populace. Perhaps it is something in the water or air, though I myself felt a growing unease during my 3 days in town, particularly after receiving an invitation to a private gathering at the local saloon. I declined and departed the following morning. Most telling is a brief addendum to this report, dated 2 weeks later. I feel compelled to note that since returning to Phoenix, I have experienced unusual symptoms, persistent headaches, difficulty sleeping, and a strange sensation of being observed when alone. Most disturbing are the dreams in which 3 women I've never met call me by name and tell me they've taken a special interest in me. I've consulted a physician who finds nothing physically wrong, yet I cannot shake the feeling that something followed me from Copper Canyon. The Copper Queen remained open, though visitors reported that the sisters now served drinks themselves, having no need for hired help. The private gatherings continued, now held weekly, according to accounts from neighboring communities. Travelers were advised to avoid Copper Canyon after dark, though few could articulate exactly why. In January 1907, territorial officials finally took notice of the situation. The dramatic population decline, combined with reports from neighboring communities about the strange condition of Copper Canyon residents, prompted an inquiry. Inspector William Talbot arrived from Phoenix on January 15, 1907, tasked with investigating the unusual circumstances. Talbot's official report, filed January 20th, presents a puzzling account. Arrived in Copper Canyon to find a community in visible decline. Many buildings abandoned, others falling into disrepair. Acting Sheriff Cooper was not available to meet with me, reportedly indisposed due to illness. Was greeted instead by Deputy Samuel Reed, who seemed reluctant to discuss town affairs. The focal point of the community appears to be an establishment called the Copper Queen Saloon, operated by 3 sisters named Blackwood. My attempts to interview these women were met with polite but firm refusals. Was informed that they were preparing for an important event and could not be disturbed. Residents I spoke with were uniformly uncommunicative regarding the recent population decline. When pressed, they attributed departures to the failing mine economy. This explanation seems inadequate given the abrupt nature of the exodus as documented in county records. Most concerning was the physical and mental condition of those who remained. Many showed signs of malnutrition despite adequate food supplies at the general store. All exhibited an unusual lethargy and reluctance to maintain eye contact. Several had unexplained marks on their wrists or necks, which they refused to discuss. When I inquired about the Copper Queen and its proprietors, residents became visibly anxious. One man, whose name I withhold out of concern for his safety, whispered to me that the sisters take what they need before being silenced by a glare from a companion. I requested access to town records, but was informed by Deputy Reed that a recent fire had destroyed most documents. This contradicts information I received in the county seat, where I was told records had been properly filed through November 1906. My investigation was cut short on my second night in town when I was approached by the Blackwood sisters outside my lodging at the boarding house. They extended an invitation to attend a special gathering at their establishment. When I declined, citing my professional responsibilities, the youngest, Catherine, I believe, took my hand and said, "We really must insist, Inspector. We've taken a special interest in you." Her touch triggered an immediate and inexplicable sense of dread. I departed Copper Canyon that night without completing my investigation. I recommend a larger force be dispatched to properly assess the situation. What Talbot's official report omits, but his private journal reveals, is a more disturbing encounter. The journal, found among his effects after his death in 1932, includes this entry from January 17, 1907. I cannot explain what I witnessed this afternoon. While examining the exterior of the Copper Queen, attempting to determine the full extent of the root cellar based on external ventilation points, I observed Eliza Blackwood through an uncurtained window. She was alone in what appeared to be her private office, standing before a large mirror mounted on the wall. What caught my attention was that her reflection did not match her movements. As she raised her right hand, the reflection raised its left. When she turned slightly, the reflection remained facing forward. Most disturbing of all, when she leaned close to the glass, her reflection seemed to lean out toward her, as though trying to emerge from the mirror itself. I must have made some sound of surprise, for she suddenly turned toward the window. For an instant, so brief I might have imagined it, her face seemed to shift, becoming something not entirely human. The angles were wrong, the eyes too large, the mouth extending too far across her face. Then she smiled pleasantly, waved as though greeting an expected visitor, and drew the curtains. I find myself questioning my own perceptions. Perhaps the desert heat, though it is January, or the strain of this disturbing investigation, has affected my faculties. Yet I cannot shake the sense that there is something profoundly wrong with the Blackwood sisters, something beyond ordinary human deviance. No such force was ever sent to investigate further. Talbot's report was filed, but apparently not acted upon. A notation in the territorial governor's records indicates that the matter was deferred pending more pressing concerns relating to potential statehood. Talbot himself requested reassignment immediately after filing his report. He was transferred to Tucson the following month and never returned to Copper Canyon. In his personal correspondence with a former colleague, discovered decades later, he admitted, "I cannot explain my reluctance to pursue the matter further. I find that when I attempt to focus on the details of what I observed in that town, my thoughts become strangely clouded. I experience an overwhelming desire to think of other things, as though my mind itself is refusing to confront whatever I encountered there. At night, I dream of mirrors and empty spaces where something vital should be." By March 1907, 1 year after the Blackwood sisters' arrival, Copper Canyon's population had dwindled to fewer than 50 individuals. The mine officially closed in April. By summer, the town appeared on the verge of becoming another Arizona ghost town. Yet the Copper Queen remained in operation, its gas lights visible for miles across the desert at night. A curious detail from this period comes from freight records of the Territorial Railroad. Between March and August 1907, 12 large crates were shipped from Copper Canyon to an address in San Francisco. The manifest describes them only as personal effects, but their combined weight, over 2 tons, suggests something more substantial. The shipper was listed as E. Blackwood, and all shipment fees were paid in gold coin. Then, on September 17, 1907, something unexpected happened. According to a brief item in the Prescott Courier, a massive fire destroyed most of Copper Canyon's remaining structures. The article notes, "Among the casualties were 3 unidentified women believed to be the proprietors of the local saloon. Few other casualties reported, as the town had been largely abandoned in recent months." In the aftermath of the fire, county officials arrived to assess the damage and assist any survivors. They found the town completely deserted. No bodies were recovered from the ruins of the Copper Queen or any other building. Most puzzling was the discovery that the fire appeared to have originated simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the town. A survey team, dispatched to map the burned area for insurance purposes, made a disturbing discovery. Beneath the Copper Queen, the root cellar extended far beyond the saloon's footprint, with tunnels radiating outward like spokes from a wheel. These tunnels connected to every significant building in town: the sheriff's office, the doctor's home, the newspaper, and numerous private residences. The official report, filed by County Engineer Martin Delgado, states, "The excavation beneath the Copper Queen Saloon represents a significant feat of engineering that would normally require months, if not years, to complete. Yet records indicate that only minimal construction permits were issued to the proprietors. The tunnels appeared to have been created recently, with none of the settling or erosion one would expect in older structures. How such extensive work was accomplished without the knowledge of town officials or residents remains unexplained." The walls of these tunnels bore unusual markings, symbols that no team member could identify. In the central chamber beneath where the saloon had stood, they discovered an elaborate arrangement of mirrors, positioned to reflect light in specific patterns, and several large brass containers whose purpose could not be determined. Delgado's report continues. The mirrors appear to be of unusual manufacture. Despite the intense heat of the fire, which melted glass bottles and windows throughout the structure above, these mirrors remain intact. Their surfaces have a peculiar quality, darker than normal mirrors, with a faint bluish tint. When standing before them, one's reflection appears slightly delayed, moving a fraction of a second after one moves. Most disturbing of all were the personal effects found scattered throughout the tunnels: watches, wedding rings, cufflinks, and other items that could be traced to individuals who had left town under mysterious circumstances over the previous year. None of these individuals were ever located, despite inquiries sent to communities throughout the Southwest. A catalog of these items, compiled by county officials and now stored in state archives, lists 47 distinct personal belongings, many engraved with the names or initials of their owners. Included among them were Dr. Phillips's medical bag, Sheriff Wade's badge, and Editor Burns' fountain pen, all belonging to men who had supposedly left Copper Canyon alive. One survey team member, in a personal letter to his wife, wrote, "I cannot adequately describe the feeling in those tunnels. A profound emptiness, as though the air itself had been drained of something essential. The strangest thing was the mirrors, a dozen or more, arranged in a circle in the central chamber. Standing among them created infinite reflections, but somehow fewer than there should have been, as though some reflections were simply missing from the sequence. Several men refused to remain in that room, claiming they felt something pulling at them from the glass. I myself experienced a peculiar lightheadedness, a sensation of being slowly drained, like a gradual bloodletting." The letter continues with a detail not included in official reports. Most disturbing was what we found behind one of the mirrors that had cracked in the fire. The glass had split, revealing a hidden compartment containing what appeared to be dozens of small glass vials, each about the size of my thumb. Each contained a swirling, luminescent substance that seemed almost to move with purpose when held. When one of the men accidentally dropped a vial, breaking it, the substance within evaporated instantly into a mist that he unfortunately inhaled. He began convulsing immediately and had to be restrained. For nearly an hour he spoke in voices not his own. Some I recognized as belonging to men who had left town months earlier. He has no memory of this episode now, and insists he merely suffered from heat exhaustion. Copper Canyon was never rebuilt. The site was abandoned, and within a few years had been largely reclaimed by the desert. The tunnels were sealed by county authorities in 1908, the official explanation citing dangerous structural instability. The mirrors and brass containers discovered in the root cellar were transported to the territorial capital for further examination. According to inventory records, they were stored in a government warehouse in Phoenix. In 1911, a fire destroyed this warehouse and all its contents. The investigation concluded it was the result of faulty electrical wiring, though one insurance investigator noted the curious fact that the fire appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously. Dr. Mercer's investigation in the 1960s brought this forgotten episode to light, though his findings were largely dismissed by the academic community. His request to reopen the tunnels for scientific examination was denied by county officials, who cited safety concerns. Mercer's application for research funding, submitted to the University of Arizona in 1965, reveals the depth of his obsession with the case. The Copper Canyon incident represents more than a historical curiosity or a case of mass hysteria. The physical evidence, the tunnels, the marks on victims, the elaborate mirror apparatus, suggests an organized, systematic process of unknown purpose. The fact that similar incidents occurred in at least 3 Nevada towns prior to the Blackwood sisters' arrival in Arizona indicates a pattern of activity that transcends coincidence. What were these women? What did they want? And most importantly, where did they go after the fire? His funding was denied. The review committee's comments included phrases like unsubstantiated speculation and over-reliance on questionable primary sources. One reviewer wrote, "Dr. Mercer's obsession with this obscure historical incident has clearly affected his scholarly judgment. His suggestion that the Blackwood sisters were something other than human has no place in serious academic research. What happened in Copper Canyon during those 18 months remains one of Arizona's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. What were the Blackwood sisters? What occurred during their private gatherings? What was in the tea they served, and what did they gain from those who drank it? Perhaps most troubling are the reports that emerged in the years following the fire, accounts from travelers and prospectors who claim to have seen 3 women walking the desert roads at night, always dressed in white, always moving toward the next remote settlement. Between 1908 and 1925, 5 small communities across the Southwest experienced patterns similar to what occurred in Copper Canyon. The arrival of 3 sisters, the opening of an unusually refined establishment, a series of mysterious ailments affecting prominent citizens, followed by population decline and, in 3 cases, destruction by fire. In each instance, the sisters used different names, but matched the same description: one older, one middle-aged, one young, and strikingly beautiful. In 1962, during the final stage of his investigation, Dr. Mercer interviewed an elderly woman in a nursing home in Phoenix who claimed to be one of the last survivors of Copper Canyon. Her testimony, recorded on audio tape now stored in the state archives, adds a final, chilling detail. "They weren't taking our lives," she whispered, her voice thin with age. "They were taking something else, something you can't see but can feel draining away. In the mirrors in that cellar, if you looked at your reflection after they'd fed from you, you could see what was missing. Part of you that should be there, just gone. Empty spaces inside that should be filled," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "The sisters had a way of looking at you that made you feel special, chosen. Catherine would touch your hand and say they'd taken a special interest in you, and despite everything in you that should have been afraid, you felt honored. You wanted to please them, to give them whatever they asked for. It wasn't until afterward, when you looked in an ordinary mirror, that you realized something had been taken, something vital that can never be replaced. When asked why she had never come forward before, she replied, "Because they're still out there, finding new towns, new people. They change their names, their appearances, but it's always the same 3, and they always know when someone speaks about them. They can feel it somehow. By speaking their names, I've invited them in. They'll come for me now. They've taken a special interest in me." The woman died in her sleep that night. The cause was listed as natural causes consistent with her advanced age. The attending nurse noted only one unusual detail: the peculiar smile on the deceased's face, as though she had seen something both terrifying and beautiful in her final moments. And behind her left ear, visible only when her hair was being prepared for burial, was a small, perfectly circular mark, like a burn. In 1968, all records relating to Copper Canyon and the Blackwood Sisters were sealed by order of the State Historical Society, cited as potentially misleading due to unverifiable claims. The site where the town once stood remains unmarked on most modern maps. Dr. Mercer died in 1969 of an apparent heart attack while working alone in his office at the university. According to colleagues who found him the next morning, his expression was one of extreme terror, and there was a small circular burn on his inner wrist that had not been there the day before. His extensive research notes on the Blackwood Sisters disappeared from his office that night and were never recovered. Yet even today, travelers in the remote areas of Arizona occasionally report seeing three figures walking together along deserted roads at twilight. All was women, always dressed in white, always disappearing when approached. And in small, isolated communities, there are whispered warnings about strangers who arrive offering refinement, culture, and exclusive invitations. The sisters, some say, are still taking a special interest in new friends, and once they've taken an interest, there's no turning away from their invitation. The desert holds many secrets. Some are buried in sand, others in government archives, still others in the fractured memories of those few who encountered the Blackwood Sisters and lived to walk away. Whatever happened in Copper Canyon in 1906 and 1907 left an imprint on that landscape that some sensitive souls can still feel today. A lingering emptiness, a hunger never satisfied, and in the wind that whispers through abandoned mining structures. Some say you can still hear voices speaking in perfect unison. We've taken a special interest in you,